What's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I have tips for you to get yourself as prepped up as possible so that you can perform on those hard sparring days. You're gonna go in, you're gonna have like a simulation of a fight in your gym, and let's face it, sometimes these rounds are extremely hard and you want to be your best version so you don't get lit up and you don't get hurt. So let's move into these tips. Many of you guys on the channel know my opinion on hard sparring versus light sparring. That's not the topic for today, but just bear in mind that when you do go in for hard sparring, you want to utilize these tips, but you also don't want to overdo it on the hard sparring because it is very damaging on the brain. And all the tips I have for you today, I just wrote them down one by one. There's no specific order. I'm just delivering them to you the same way that they popped into my head as I started creating ideas for this episode. So let's move in to the first tip, and that is make sure you do a proper warm-up to avoid burnout. Now this is very similar to something that you would do in the fight. You don't just jump into the fight without doing a warm-up, and for me it's very important that I get my heart rate up to a max, let's say, acceleration, so that when I do get into the rounds of hard sparring, when I do hit that point where my heart just boom, 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 it's not the first time it's happened, because I've made this mistake before. I've gone in and somebody says to me, "Oh Gabe, do you want to spar?" And I was just standing on the side in my running shoes, just walked in from the street. I'm like, "Oh, okay, sure." And within a minute or two, I'm huffing and puffing and burnt out because I did not do a proper warm-up. So treat your hard sparring like a fight. Do the appropriate warm-up, take a little break, a little rest, and then jump in for those rounds. It'll keep you safe and avoid you gassing out too early. Our next tip is to make sure that you do not take your first punch and it was the first time during the day that you were touched in the nose, because your eyes can start watering, you'll be shocked. So I like to touch my face a few times. If you guys have watched me fight, you know I like to do that as well. I like to make sure that when I'm walking in, I'm hitting myself. So the first time my opponent touches me, I'm not shocked by it. And you can push down on your nose very gently, sort of close your eyes and just touch your eyes. That sensation will make it that much easier the first time somebody lands some leather on you, and you won't be bothered by it because you did the appropriate steps to warm your face up, essentially. The next thing that a lot of people don't do in sparring, which is very important, is utilize Vaseline. Now it doesn't matter if you're wearing a headgear or not wearing a headgear. If you have the headgear on, just Vaseline the outside of it, the top, the forehead, so that when punches hit, they don't snap your head back as much and they slide off a little bit more. But extra important to put on the Vaseline over the eyes, the eyebrows, you just in that area, maybe down the cheeks, the nose, so that if you're doing your sparring without headgear and you do get clipped, you're not going to have a high likelihood of cuts opening up. But in addition, again, the same thing, the punches will slide just a little bit more. This is a great way to prep yourself up for the hard sparring. Utilize the Vaseline, have a little jar in your bag, your training bag. You're gonna at some point be very happy that you took the steps to protect yourself. Next up, especially if you are sparring with somebody who you have not put a lot of rounds in, is make sure you gauge them in the first minute. Don't run out and just start letting your hands fly, because that's exactly what you do not want to do in a fight. When you have not assessed your opponent's speed, power, their technique, all of that, you should be practicing in sparring rounds to do this exact same thing. But it's a great way to make sure that you essentially beat your sparring partner, because right away you can assess everything. Many people don't do this. They come out really hard in sparring, and I like to always take it slow and especially see what kind of intensity they're going to bring in these rounds. Now everybody's going to be a little bit different for the next tip. We are talking about food and water prior to the sparring rounds. Now 100%, you don't want to come in with your stomach just overloaded with food. If you take a body shot, you're going to feel terrible. You also don't want to go, okay, I'm going to get really hydrated before chug a liter of water and then be bouncing around having your stomach sloshing with liquid. Make sure that you figure out what the ideal amount of food and liquid are for you, and don't make the mistake of going, okay, because Gabriel said You don't want a big heavy stomach, I'm not going to eat at all. You still want some energy and you still need some liquid. So it's balancing it out. For myself, I know exactly what I want to put in my body before a really hard session, and I do that. Doesn't matter if I'm going to the track or if I'm going for hard sparring rounds. I always kind of eat the same, drink the same before these workouts. Now, if you're anything like me, you're going to get nervous when you're going in for hard sparring rounds, especially if it's somebody who's brand new. Because yes, you are kind of simulating a fight. So make sure to prepare yourself properly, you utilize some visualization and some breath work beforehand to calm yourself down. And again, this is perfect practice for the fight because it's the same thing. You know, I sit there and I just do my breathing. And then sometimes sort of pump fast. And I just get everything going and calm the nerves and just get my heart ready for a really, really anxiety-driven training session. That's just part of it. But if you can really remember to get down that breathing, it's going to help you a lot. Now, before you step in for your hard sparring, you want to make sure you utilize this tip, which is lose your ego. Many people get tagged and then they go, oh, I'm going to get this guy back. And they come forward full tilt, trying to get the guy back for whatever he just hit you with. That is a mistake, and this is exactly, again, what you do not want to do in the fight, but even more so in sparring, because sparring, we're not supposed to be trying to knock each other out, and I see this way too often. But even in a fight, if you get smashed and your next reaction is to run forward and get this guy back, you might run into another shot. You need to calm yourself, take a moment, get collected, and from there, you can move on. So lose the ego, especially because we don't want people getting knocked down in sparring rounds, but also because it's good practice for the fights. Next up, I want to talk about having the proper gear to minimize damage for hard sparring rounds. Now, obviously, everybody's going to have on their boxing gloves, they're going to have on their shin pads, but let's talk about a few additional things you can do. Number one, I like to double shin pad up if I'm doing hard sparring kickboxing. That means cloth shin pads below my big thick leather ones. This will help protect my sparring partner but also keep my shins safe if I happen to bang into a knee or something like that. I also like to make sure I have my custom mouthguard in. A lot of people don't take the steps and spend the money to get the custom mouthguard. Very important. And in addition to that, I like to have on the one cup, which I utilize all the time now, because if you get hit square in the groin, you're going to be so happy that you have this piece of gear. It is the Diamond Groin Protector. I actually have a link down below which will save you 10%. This is something that you absolutely have to have if you're doing hard sparring rounds, because anybody who's been kicked once in the groin knows how much it destroys you. And if you're thinking of having kids down the road or you just want to be safe, you want to have this one piece of protection, which is above and beyond all its competition. Now, that was supposed to be it. That was all my points, but then one other just jumped into my mind. This is just more a tip about understanding what you're going to be putting yourself through. So we're talking about setting round volume before you start your rounds. I do this every time now because I hate jumping in with somebody and finding out after 3 rounds that that's all they wanted to do. And they went 100% and I was kind of going 80 in anticipation of maybe doing 8 to 10 rounds. But if somebody's, wanting to do 10 rounds in a row and I go too hard early on because I thought we were just doing 5, you want to have everything structured. You want to know what you're in for. So I always clarify beforehand, and you guys should do the same. How many rounds are we doing today? And then once you complete those rounds, you stop. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people, or being victim of it myself, where we go, oh, how about one more round? And the guy goes, yeah, let's do one more. And then you get injured in that extra round, even though you already completed everything you said you were going to do initially. So those guys are my tips for hard sparring, making sure that you are prepping up properly and you can get the best out of the training to make sure that going into fights, you did a fantastic job in those training sessions. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a like. If you have not already, join the channel, get subscribed. Train hard, guys, and I will see you back here soon for another episode.